Kit Green spots a suspicious new alliance on Coronation Street as the investigation into the murder of Theo Silverton ramps up. With several suspects roaming around Weatherfield, who does the police officer suspect? The villainous Theo was revealed to be the victim in the ITV soap's Murder Week, though it isn't clear who committed the crime. There are 6 suspects: Todd, George, Christina, Danielle, Summer and Gary, in all, with the mystery set to deepen. This week's scenes have seen the police make initial inquiries, with George, Gary and Maria all being brought in for questioning. Though it isn't apparent who murdered Theo, they are all hiding secrets of some sort. Today's episode saw George gather Christina, Glenda, Mary, Sarah, Sean and Summer to discuss Todd's situation. Despite facing abuse at the hands of Theo, he has struggled to adjust to life following his traumatic ordeal. He doesn't take kindly to the group gathering behind his back, and posits that one of them may have murdered Theo. He gets a surprise later on, as Theo's ex-wife Danielle visits him in the Rovers. In a candid conversation, she recalls her time with Theo, saying she was always afraid of him due to his controlling nature. Todd, meanwhile, said he was grieving Theo despite all the trauma that he left in his wake. Kit, meanwhile, was interviewing Jody following her return to Weatherfield. David and Shona were both present, with the police officer later telling Sarah that they are yet to find a lead for her attacker. She also recalls her conversation with Todd, where he accused the group of plotting to murder Theo. This perks Kit's curiosity, and he explains that Todd has the strongest motive to kill Theo. Todd meets with Gary later on, and plainly asks if he was the one who killed Theo. Gary says that he merely agreed to Todd's suggestion of scaring him off, and states that he only smashed up his van. Todd accuses Gary of lying, and Gary follows with the same claim. They agree to not speak any further for the time being due to bad optics, but they are unaware that Kit was watching the meeting unfold. The cliffhanger leads into next week's developments, where Kit becomes convinced that Gary was the one who killed Theo. With some undiscovered evidence pointing to his guilt, could he really have murdered the villain? The rain had started just before dawn in Weatherfield, thin and needling at first, before settling into a steady, relentless drizzle. It clung to the cobbles like a warning, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. Inside the police station, Kit Green stood by the window, arms folded, watching the gray sky blur into the skyline. He hadn't slept. Not properly. Not since Theo's body had been found. Theo Silverton. Dead. And now the entire street felt like a crime scene that refused to settle. The case was supposed to be straightforward, at least on paper. A victim with enemies. Plenty of them. Motive stacked high enough to bury any one suspect. But something wasn't right. And Kit could feel it. A case that didn't add up. The investigation had already identified multiple suspects, each with their own reason to want Theo gone. Todd. George. Gary. Summer. Danielle. Christina. Too many threads. Too many stories. And yet, none of them quite fit. Kit tapped his pen against the desk, staring at the board of photos and timelines. He had spent hours rearranging them, trying to force a pattern into existence. That's when he saw it. Not something obvious. Not a confession or a clue. Just a connection. A line that shouldn't have been there. The moment of realization. It started with a CCTV still. Blurry. Grainy. Almost useless. But Kit had learned long ago that the smallest details often mattered most. 2 figures. One he recognized immediately, Gary Windass. The other. Partially obscured. But the posture, the movement. Kit leaned closer. "Run that again," he muttered. The technician replayed the clip. There it was again. A flicker of familiarity. And suddenly, it clicked. "George?" Kit whispered. An alliance that shouldn't exist. Gary and George Shuttleworth. Together. At night. Near the scene. Kit straightened slowly. That didn't make sense. Not publicly, anyway. They moved in different circles. Different priorities. Different loyalties. But here they were, caught in the same place, at the same time. And neither of them had mentioned it. The interrogation begins. Later that day, George sat across from Kit in the interview room, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "I've told you everything," George insisted, voice tight. "I was at home." Kit didn't respond immediately. He just slid the photo across the table. George froze. Only for a second. But it was enough. "You want to try that again?" Kit asked quietly. George swallowed. That doesn't prove anything." "No," Kit said. "But it proves you lied." Gary's version of events. Gary, on the other hand, was harder to crack. Leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, he met Kit's gaze without flinching. "You've got nothing," Gary said flatly. Kit tilted his head. "You were with George." Gary didn't react. Too controlled. Too careful. Which, to Kit, said everything. Behind closed doors. That night, away from the station, the truth was far messier. Gary stood in the shadows near the ginnel, waiting. George arrived minutes later, looking over his shoulder. "You shouldn't have come," George hissed. Gary shrugged. "Bit late for that, isn't it?" "They know," George said. "Kit knows." Gary's jaw tightened. "He suspects." "No," George snapped. "He knows something's off." Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Dangerous. The secret between them. What neither man had told the police was simple. They had met that night. But not by chance. It had been planned. Because both of them had something to lose. And Theo had been the problem. Kit connects the dots. Back at the station, Kit sat alone again, piecing everything together. Two suspects. One secret meeting. And a murder that had been anything but random. This wasn't chaos. It was coordination. And that changed everything. A dangerous theory. Kit leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "What if," he murmured, "this wasn't one person?" The idea settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle. Not a lone killer. An alliance. A partnership. Two people working together. And suddenly, all the inconsistencies made sense. Pressure builds. As the investigation tightened, the cracks began to show. George became erratic. Gary became defensive. And the rest of Weatherfield started to notice. Whispers spread. Accusations followed. No one trusted anyone anymore. Todd's growing fear. Meanwhile, Todd Grimshaw watched everything unfold with quiet dread. Because if Gary and George were hiding something, then the truth about that night might be worse than anyone imagined. The confrontation. Kit finally brought them in together. Gary and George. Side by side. The tension between them was immediate. "You two want to explain why you were together that night?" Kit asked. Neither spoke. Kit leaned forward. "This is your chance." George looked at Gary. Gary looked away. And in that moment, Kit knew. They were connected. A truth still hidden. But knowing wasn't the same as proving. And that was the problem. Because whatever had happened that night, they weren't ready to admit it. Not yet. The cliffhanger. As the episode closed, Kit stood alone once more, staring at the evidence board. Two suspects. One alliance. And a murder that was far from solved. He picked up a marker and drew a bold line between Gary and George. Then circled it. Hard. This, he said under his breath, is where the truth is. Outside, the rain finally stopped. But the storm in Weatherfield. That was only just beginning. Ending note, story direction insight. The current storyline in Coronation Street is building into a long-running whodunit, with multiple suspects and interrogations led by Kit and Lisa, and the killer not expected to be revealed until later in the summer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Coronation.